I'm Judy Shaw for NYSE Floor Talk. Joining me today is Mickey Bresman. He is co-founder and CEO at Semperis. Mickey, it's wonderful to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I'm excited to talk with you, but before we get started, just a quick note to viewers, this interview is for informational purposes only. The NYSE doesn't recommend any investments or investment strategies. All right, so Mickey, Semperis was recently awarded the Deloitte Fast 500 Award for the third consecutive year in a row, celebrating your consistent triple-digit growth. To what do you attribute this growth?
It's a great question. I think several different components. One is the value that we drive for our customers and the reason that they are adopting our solutions to help them with this new environment of digital transformation, where the cybersecurity aspect becomes a much bigger play in what customers are thinking about, with the identity becoming the center of how organizations goes about protecting themselves. So that is definitely one, the value for the customer. The other one, and I mentioned it on some of my other interviews as well, is that at the same day that we have announced the 500 recognition for the fastest growing companies, we've also announced that we've been selected as one of the 100 best places to work for by Dun & Bradstreet. And for us, those always go together. This is kind of fixed with our mission of being a force for good. And from my perspective, that's the power of being good to your employees, having the employees support the company and push it to where it needs to be, and through that, providing the value to the customer.
All right, now you're also a leader in the Gartner cybersecurity top trending category of identity, threat detection, and response. How do you stand out from other vendors in this space?
It's a great question. So ITDR has been recognized by Gartner as a category, I want to say probably about a year and a half ago, and we've been in the space for quite a while. I think the reason that Semperis is leading in that space have to do with several factors. The first one is the completeness of solution. If you think about the attack cycle, it have the pre-attack, where we basically try to help customers to be as ready as possible. Then you have the during the attack, where you want to identify it as fast as you can that you've been breached, and then to make sure that you don't lose sight on what the attacker is doing. And in addition to that, also to try and stop them as fast as possible. And then you have the unfortunate last stage, which we know happens, and that is what happens when you've been fully breached, lost control of the environment, potentially have been the ransomware situation encrypted end-to-end. How do you go about bouncing back as fast as possible? And Semperis have the completeness of solutions. So we have playbooks for every one of those scenarios, and we're helping customers in each one of those. And I think that, plus the combination of the best identity security experts that you can find worldwide today, is what getting us the advantage.
All right, now Mickey, tell me, what's your advice to cybersecurity business leaders this year? And what cybersecurity areas should organizations prioritize?
That's a great question. It's a tough one for several different reasons. The landscape, the security landscape is constantly changing. The new threats arise all the time. I mean, I always kind of jokingly saying that I don't do any predictions for more than 3 years forward, because if you were to think about it, 3 years ago, if somebody were to say COVID, or a war in Ukraine and all of those things, we probably would not be thinking about it. But if I were to distill it to some basic advice that I can provide, I would say focus on cyber resiliency. And by saying cyber resiliency, what I mean is there are fundamental things that any company can do today to make sure that they're resilient to those type of situations like the ransomware. I also always remind people that ransomware is not necessarily going to go specifically against your company. It might be actually collateral damage, like the NotPetya and the Russia-Ukraine situation 4 or 5 years ago. So if you want to be resilient, one thing that I would encourage people to think about is what happens in the end of the cycle. Meaning, if you've been hit, what is your plan? Do you have the ability to bounce back? Do you have a disaster recovery plan? Have you thought about it? Have you practiced it? Have you tested it? It sounds something relatively simple to do, but you will be surprised how many companies actually don't take the time to invest in it as they should.
All right, well, Mickey, that's great advice. So thank you for coming down and joining me on Floor Talk today.
Thank you, it's been great.